He had his gun, so he just swung it open.
I start to notice that, the atmosphere feels a little bit weird.
First thing he seen was this 6.5 foot tall, broad shoulder, dark hair. That freaked him out.
We hadn't talked to her about like life and death and what any of that means. She's 3 years old,
So we turned around. Suddenly there's a whole tree falling across the road.
And she was describing to us that, there was a deceased person that she could see visually.
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, where we tackle the ever-expanding history and mystery of monsters and supernatural madness every Monday. You can find us at CryptidClues.ca for more information, or even check out exclusive content and support us at patreon.com/CryptidClues.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Cryptid Clues. I am your host, Taylor, and today we're doing a little bit of a off-the-rails kind of a topic. But before we get into that, remember, you can reach us directly via cryptidclues@gmail.com, or find us on social media channels and Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all over the place. So let's get into this. Now, the title of this episode might be a bit confusing for some, but ultimately what's going on here is that an old memory kind of just popped back into my mind when I was thinking about past injuries. Now, I know it's very random, but I was just sort of in a self-reflecting moment. I was at work and work was slow, and just, you think about things, and injuries popped into my mind. Specifically, this one memory. I was at my grandfather's funeral. My cousins and I were on a golf cart, which was used to help shuttle people to and from the reception at my grandparents' home. So me and my cousins, we're just on there having a good old time, mucking around. My oldest cousin was driving it, and my younger cousin was in the passenger seat. And I was sitting on the back. And if you've seen a golf cart, you know how sometimes the back seats are reversed and you can just hop off quickly. Now, younger me thought that it would be funny to hop off as they are going at light speed. They would turn around and be like, "Whoa, where did Taylor go?" So as they were going, zooming, I stepped off and immediately smacked my head onto the concrete, which felt absolutely amazing. So amazing that I never want to do it again. Now, after this stunt failed, I thought I would have been bleeding or fainted or something terrible would have followed. But surprisingly, no. I was fine. There was no head wound, at least on the outside, and no blackout, oddly enough, because this is a very hard smack against the concrete. My head just boom. I got back up and life continued on. So the point of this is I was speculating that what if I did go unconscious and this is all still in my mind? Note that this event was almost 13 years ago, so that's a long time to pass. And I thought that this would be maybe a wild Matrix-style scenario. I've told a few of my family members this, and they laughed about it, and I laughed too. But our brains are very powerful. And I thought, gosh, what would I do if I just woke up in a hospital bed one day and I was a kid again? And it turns out after I hit my head, I was in hospital in a coma for a few weeks or a couple months. And this show doesn't exist. You guys aren't real. You're just a part of my figment of my imagination, I guess, or something my brain has conjured up. My family, all of that. This is all just a manifestation that my brain has conjured up throughout my own mini coma. And I just haven't woken up from this yet, which is why I say the Matrix, because they're living in a different mental state. So the other downside to this, what if time in this coma was the same length of time in the true real world that I'm experiencing now? Or I guess, no, the opposite, vice versa. So essentially, when I wake up, has it been 13 years later? Just like in this state, it has been 13 years as well, but my life hasn't developed in that technical, real life, I guess, because I'm in my coma. So it hasn't developed the same as I would have developed my life here in this coma state. Does that make sense? It's a little convoluted. I'm just comparing the present to the possible alternate reality here. Now, I'm thanking the universe that hopefully I'm not living in a dream, that this is the actual reality, because I've got a lot of things I'm very happy and proud of, my family and friends and all that. But of course, there are a lot of things that do really suck now in the world too. So I guess the term, maybe it's like a catch-22. I don't know, but I digress. The brain itself is very powerful, considered to be one of the most powerful computers, well, in existence, with a plethora of capabilities that no man-made supercomputer can match. This includes learning, pattern recognition, adaptability. It can generate massive amounts of output while using little power. The amount of information our brains can store is also just borderline never-ending. We aren't limited by our brain storage capacity like 1 gigabyte or 1 terabyte hard drive. I guess 1 gigabyte is kind of irrational. 1 terabyte external hard drive for a computer or something, which is crazy to think about. And that's primarily when we are awake. But even when we are asleep, our brains, they're up to bat. Memory consolidation, for example, is when, sleeping helps strengthen and integrate new memories into long-term memory banks. And sleeping also helps our brains adapt to new information. It improves our creativity and our concentration and our mental performance as well. Those all get amplified and increase when we get an adequate amount of rest. And of course, while sleeping, our brain cycles through different stages of REM, which is rapid eye movement, as well as non-REM sleep. But specifically during REM sleeping, that is when most dreaming occurs. But what happens to our brains while you're in a coma? Our brains are still active, but their functionality is at a significantly reduced level with minimal activity, meaning they are unconscious and unable to respond to external stimuli, like sounds or pain. Essentially, its external response system and interaction is not there, but this doesn't dismiss what's going on internally. Well, of course, at reduced levels, there are still things happening. And one of the biggest things I found while looking into this was most of the time, people that are in comas, when they wake up, they report being able to hear a lot of the conversation around them, hearing the nurses talking, doctors talking, and hearing their family members talking as well. I think that's why it's a very encouraged process to, talk to your loved ones when they are in a coma, because there's a chance they can really hear you. There is medical research that states it's unlikely that someone in a coma can dream, however, in a traditional sense, because a coma state lacks the necessary brain activity associated with the sleep-wake cycle required for dreaming. But that's not the case coming from those who wake up post-coma and claim to have dreams. Now, of course, not everyone is dreaming. For some, I found it's just a black void. But there are lots of people that say, hey, there's things going on. And I quote, "I was in a coma after a car accident. I only remember one thing. I was looking down a street. I fell to my knees while coughing. I grabbed at my throat. I looked down and saw my esophagus on the ground, and then I fell onto my side. I learned later that it was probably my vent tube coming out of my throat." End quote. What I find interesting about this is, while in a coma, our brains don't respond to, the external stimuli. Now, the brain still internally created a scenario that reflected on some level its understanding that an external change was happening, something a little bit discomforting, and that discomfort popped up into their dream. Of course, take that with a grain of salt, because we don't necessarily have that scientific proof that something outside, external, does directly impact something internally. But me personally, I am maybe a little bit biased, and I think that there's a little bit more to that, which we're going to be getting into in this episode. Of course, like I said, there is no shortage of reports coming from those in comas discussing their dreams. And I quote, "I was in a medically induced coma for a week and a half, courtesy of a car accident. My family was at my bedside the entire time. Whenever I would move, they would calmly say to me that I had been in a bad car accident. I was okay, and I was in a hospital. In my dreams, I was going about my daily business of college classes and coffee houses. The twist would be that I was introducing myself as having been in a bad car accident. But I was okay, and in a hospital, or in a class. I dropped a pen because my arm hurt, and the student in front of me says that of course my arm hurts because I was in a bad car accident," and so on. Now, these morphine dreams varied, and were many, from the surreal to the mundane. Then I had the realization that if I've been in a bad car accident, that I should go to the hospital. So in my dreams, I walk into the local college town's hospital, politely check into triage saying, "Hi, I've been in a bad car accident, but I'm okay, and I want to get checked out." That's when the nurses and doctors descended upon me in a life-saving frenzy, and after that, I opened my eyes. End quote. This sort of timing is absolutely surreal, and I personally can vouch for it. That's something I've mentioned on the show before, and one of my most scarring dreams to date was I was jumping from rooftop to rooftop in a fairly exaggerative way, almost as if I was a superhero and had superpowers. And yet, this monster was chasing me, which was the causation and forcing me to keep jumping from roof to roof. So eventually, the next building I hit, it was too far for me to make. And I could see that I was falling down the skyscraper. I wasn't going to obviously not make it now, and getting closer and closer to the ground. And as soon as I hit the ground, I woke up on the floor next to my bed, and holy smokes, that's been seared into my brain. But the brain and body they share that unique bond with each other. And when an instance occurs, the other responds in turn while cognitively aware or in a coma. And of course, that's my own perception of this based on the evidence that I've observed so far. We'll have to leave it to each and every one of your guys' observations and perceptions of what you think is really going on with this, because we really just don't have the full story and the full truth yet to figure this out. But I digress. Another interesting aspect is how what happens in a day can actually impact our dreams at night, as well as, being in a comatose state. And I quote, "Before I entered a coma, I fell from the second story of a gym under construction, and I landed on my head. I'd watched The Grudge. So during the entirety of the coma, I dreamed that I was trapped in a completely white room with the Grudge girl. She never moved and just stood there. But when I woke up from that coma, I refused to close my eyes for a couple of nights from fear." End quote. This is interesting because I do think while we are asleep, there are certain things that will try to, I don't want to say latch on, but maybe probe or kind of get in close to you while your mental state is in a sense of, what is that word? Not disbelief. Is kind of not even detached, but there's a word for being a little bit just spaced out. I wish I could recall it. I digress. There are things that know that our minds are in these positions of being detached and kind of just spaced a little bit, and that's when they try to maybe make a move on you, and you got to be careful. Of course, in this sense, is this person preemptively prompted and primed up the dream sequence with something very horrific by watching a movie. And what terrifies me about this is the sympathy I share for this person. Devoid of being in a coma myself to relate in that regard, I have watched horror movies, namely zombie flicks, before bed, and when I would go to sleep, of course, I would dream about them, and it's not fun. Sometimes the dreams are a little difficult to remember, but ever since I started using my own dream journal now, at Reuben's request from discussion, it's been a bit easier to recall the more unappealing dreams and self-reflect on my day prior and what happened during that day to maybe cause the nightmares. So being able to understand, okay, well, I'm dreaming about this because I had this happen in my day, and you can kind of, put a path from the causation to the problem or the dream or the nightmare. But I digress. Ultimately, there is evidence from my own experience to justify what you see in the daytime transitioning into when you go to sleep. And I quote, "I was in a medically induced coma for almost a month due to hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. I had a lot of dreams while under. Everything I dreamt was revolved around me being sick or in a hospital, so I knew that much. But I had a dream about getting dragged into the ocean. They were taking me somewhere I could be fixed, and that was the best mode of transportation. I remember being in a hospital out in the desert, and an army of bone poverty-stricken people invading the hospital wanted to be helped, banging on the doors, yelling to be let in. I dreamt that the light fixture they could move around above the bed that's what was feeding me pills. I could see them falling down the arms of the light. I also dreamt that I was in a room with a pyramid of boxes that I could walk up and choose, and each one took me to a different time or place, with one of my friends or family exercising, trying to keep me alive. A day after one of my surgeries to have an LVAD implanted, I came out of the operating room and I had developed a clot in my left leg that day. Still under, I dreamt about some big machine getting close to my leg and it was going to cut it off if I didn't get out of the way, but I was stuck and I couldn't move. I don't remember what happened with that dream, but when I finally woke up, my family said that I got a clot, and if the surgeon couldn't remove it, I was probably going to have my leg amputated. It's important to note that was after having this dream. One that really hit that I can't remember if I've told anyone, but I just remember being in a coma for over 9 years and finally waking up to my wife and seeing my 9-year-old son for the first time while in an ambulance. And I kept dropping in and out of the coma, not being able to communicate with them. End quote. Dreams and comas both have this strange, inexplainable quality that just, it sticks with you. And if you stop to think about them, dreams, there's something we all know. It's sometimes a bizarre and vivid story that can play out in your mind while we're sleeping, of course. But no matter how normal they may feel or bizarro they may feel, they have that tendency to sometimes go a little bit over the top. And sometimes you could wonder why that dream, why now, prompting you to think, hey, maybe there's some higher power or message involved. To each his own. And comas, well, they take that mystery to a whole new level. Like we mentioned prior, there is something to be said about those who are physically here but mentally somewhere else. And even with the brain activity being lower, coma and dreams, they still share something. And like we said before, a lot of people believe dreams are more than just brain activity, like they're messages from somewhere deeper. And when it comes to comas, some think the soul actually goes even further, traveling or learning while the body is on pause. There are these stories that you might find and hear about where people who've come back describe vivid moments of peace, seeing loved ones who've passed, or even a feeling like they were in a completely different place that's connected to current pain or debacles they feel physically, even though they're being physically detached from the present. It's interesting how many people actually look at how about dreams are almost like being in a different state of reality, and you're just leaving this reality and living a life parallel in that other reality. But it's not hard to wonder if there's more going on here than just science can explain. But I guess that's the one thing we've come to realize on this show, is that science just can't always explain everything, and that's okay, because not everything in life needs to make sense. Whether you see it as spiritual, biological, or some mix of the two, there's something humbling about realizing that we don't have all those answers. As much as it is aggravating, but I'm sure humans, they're good at figuring things out, and I'm sure they will eventually crack the code. We seem to be quite good at that sort of thing. But in closing, we have one more case, and I quote, "I had a road traffic accident and fell into a coma and dreamed that I woke up 30 years in the past. It was a hyper-realistic constructed reality. I had a job, my actual job, but with much less technology. And there were complex, three-dimensional people who became my friends. Now, I didn't know what had happened, but it honestly felt like I'd landed on a different planet. And all the way through the experience, I felt that if I could only work out the reason I was there, I'd be able to go home. In the end, I woke up, and honestly, the world felt comparatively colorless since. In a messed up way, I wanted to go back. I miss my friends from the past, and my life doesn't feel as fulfilling in the present day as it did back then." End quote. It's just interesting because I feel like I've had some type of dreams where I've gone back to certain places in my life or kind of revisited certain scenarios and done things differently. It's weird. And if you get to that point where you can actually control your dreams, it does make me wonder if someone that was very experienced in dream walking could utilize that ability and that skill while in a coma and could, I guess per se, come out of that coma on command, or while they're in a coma, just, dream walk. It's a mystery. It really, really is. But that is all the time we have for this week's episode of Cryptid Clues. I hope you enjoyed it. We will be back next week. But until then, you can reach us directly via CryptidClues@gmail.com, social media channels, and all that fun stuff. You guys already know it. So I hope you all have a wonderful week ahead. And remember, take care and stay safe.